A Search in Secret India. The final chapter, Chapter 17. Tablets of Forgotten Truth. One afternoon, I noticed a new visitor walk with dignified step into the hall and take his seat quite close to the Maharishi's couch. He is extremely dark-skinned, but otherwise his face is highly refined. He makes no attempt to speak, but the Maharishi immediately gives him a welcoming smile. The man's personality makes a powerful impression upon me. He looks like a graven Buddha. Extraordinary tranquility is deeply charactered on his face. When our eyes meet eventually, he gazes for a long time at me until I turn away, disquieted. Throughout the afternoon, he does not utter a single word. My next contact with him comes the following day, and in a totally unexpected manner. I leave the hall and return to my hut to prepare tea, as the servant Raju has gone off to the township for some things. Unlocking the heavy door, I am about to step on the threshold when something moves across the floor and stops within a few inches of my feet. Its furtive gliding motion and the faint hissing which I fancy I can hear warn me almost before I see it that a snake is in the room. For the moment, I am so struck with horror at my escape from death which lurks underfoot that I am at a complete loss what to do. The creature holds my fascinated gaze, and yet it terrifies me. My nerves are strung to the highest pitch of tension. Horror and loathing rise up in the depths of my heart, but my eyes remain staring at the handsome, shapely head of the creature. The surprise encounter has quite overwhelmed me. The malevolent reptile continues to watch me in a cold-blooded way, its hood raised around its sinewy neck and its sinister eyes fixed upon mine. At last, I manage to recover my senses and draw back with a rush. I am about to go off for a heavy stick with which to break its spine when the figure of yesterday's new visitor appears in the clearing. His noble face, with its habitual look of dignified reflection, slightly restores my calm. He approaches my hut, takes the situation in at a glance, and imperturbably begins to enter the room. I shout a warning to him, but he takes no notice. Once more, I am distinctly unnerved, for, weaponless as he is, he holds both hands out towards the snake. Its forked tongue moves about in its open mouth, but it does not attempt to attack him. Just then, two men, attracted by the sound of my shout, come hurrying to the hut from the pool where they have been washing themselves. Before they reach us, the strange visitor stands quite close to the snake, which bends its head before him, and then he gently strokes its tail. The fangs seize their sinister movement in the handsome but venomous head until the arrival of the other two men. Then the supple body of the snake begins to move with a quick, writhing movement as it seems to recollect itself, and before 4 pairs of eyes, it slithers quickly out of the hut into the safe refuge of the jungle undergrowth. "It is a young cobra," remarks one of the late arrivals, who is a leading merchant in the township, and who often comes to pay his respects to the sage or to have a chat with me. I express my astonishment at the fearless way in which my first visitor handled the snake. "Ah, that is Yogi Ramaya," replies the merchant when I ask for an explanation. "He is one of the most advanced disciples of the Maharishi, a remarkable man." It is not possible to enter into conversation with the yogi because I discover that part of the special discipline which he has imposed upon himself consists in keeping strict silence, and because he comes from a Telugu-speaking district. His acquaintance with English is as limited as mine with Telugu, that is, almost nil. I learn also that he maintains an almost complete reserve and does not associate with the others in the place as a rule, that he stays in a small stone shelter, which he has had constructed under the shadow of some huge boulders on the other side of the pool, and that he has been a disciple of the Maharishis for 10 years. The gap between us is bridged, however, soon after. I meet him at the pool, whither he has come with a brass pitcher for water. His darkly mysterious but benignant countenance again attracts me, and as I happen to have a camera in my pocket, I request him, by means of gestures, to pose for his photograph. He offers no objection and even follows me to the hut after it's taken. There we encounter the ex-station master, who is squatting outside my door and awaiting my arrival. In the result, I discover that the old man knows Telugu almost as well as he knows English, and is quite agreeable to play the interpreter between us, with penciled notes as a substitute for vocal speech. The yogi is not very communicative, and evidently dislikes being interviewed, but I managed to elicit a few more facts about him. Ramaya is still on the right side of 40. He owns some landed property in the Nellore district, and although he has not formally renounced the world, he lets his family carry on the active control of his estates so that he can give more time to his yoga interests. He has a group of his own disciples in Nellore, but once every year he leaves them to visit the Maharishi, with whom he stays for 2 or 3 months at a time. He has made an extensive tour of South India in his younger days, when he sought actively for a master in yoga. He has studied under different teachers and developed some exceptional faculties and powers. Breathing exercises and meditation practices come easily to him. He appears to have outstripped his teachers, because he obtained experiences which they could not explain satisfactorily to him. As a consequence, he came at last to the Maharishi, who quickly provided him with the correct explanation and assisted his further course. Yogi Ramaya tells me that he has come to stay for 2 months, bringing his own personal servant with him, and that he has been glad to find a Westerner taking an interest in the ancient wisdom of the East. I show him an illustrated English magazine, and he makes a curious commentary upon one of the pictures. When your wise men in the West leave off trying to make engines run faster than those which they already have, and begin to look into their own selves, your race may then find more real happiness. Can you say that your people become more contented each time they discover something that enables them to travel more quickly? Before he leaves me, I question him about the incident with the young cobra. He smilingly scribbles a reply. What have I to be afraid of? I approached it without hatred, and with love for all beings in my heart. I fancy that there is more behind the yogi's words than his somewhat sentimental explanation implies, but without further questioning, I let him return to his lonely dwelling across the pool. During the weeks which succeed my first meeting with Ramaya, I come to know him a little better. We meet frequently in the little clearing around my hut, or at the poolside, or even outside his own dwelling. I find in his outlook something which is conformable to my own temperament, while his large dark eyes possess a tranquillity which is singularly attractive. We strike up a strange kind of silent friendship, which culminates one day when he gives me his blessing by stroking my head and then clasping each hand in his own. aside from a few penciled notes in Telugu, which the old man translates for me. No word is spoken during the whole of our association. Yet, I feel that something is being built up between Ramaya and me which can never be broken down. From time to time, I accompany him on short walks through the jungle areas, and once or twice we toil up in the rugged hillside amid great boulders, and wherever we go he is always a serene, dignified figure whose noble carriage I cannot help but admire. It is not long, however, before I receive another striking revelation of his extraordinary power. A letter has found its way to me, bringing extremely bad news. It means, so far as I can see, that my financial fuel would unexpectedly run so low soon that my stay in India must be cut short. I can, of course, enjoy the protracted hospitality of the Maharishi's hermitage, which the disciples will doubtless offer, but such a position would go right against the grain of my nature. And in any case the matter is settled for me by certain obligations which I consider it my duty faithfully to meet, and which can now be met only through the resumption of activities in the West. The news provides an excellent test of the mental and spiritual training which I have been undergoing, and so poor is my material that I emerge quite unpredictably. I feel badly shaken. I am unable to effect my usual inner contact with the Maharishi in the hall, and leave him abruptly after a short visit. For the rest of the day I wander about, somewhat disconsolate, a silent rebel against the crushing power of fate, which can upset all one's plans by a single blow. I turn into the hut and fling a weary body and wearier mind upon the blanket. Some kind of deep reverie must have supervened, for a while later I start with sudden shock at a gentle tap on the door. I bid the visitor enter. Very slowly the door opens, and to my surprise, Ramaya's figure enters the hut. I rise hastily, and then, when he squats down, do the same, facing him. He looks intently at me, a questioning expression in his eyes. I am alone with a man whose tongue I cannot speak, and who cannot speak a word of English. Yet a queer feeling impels me to address him in my tongue, which is so alien to him, in the almost fantastic expectation that he will catch my thoughts, though he fail to catch my words. And so, in a few jerky phrases, I hint at the difficulties which have suddenly dropped out of the skies upon me, and supplement my speech with gestures of defeat and expressions of disgust. Ramaya listens quietly. When I finish, he nods his head gravely in sympathetic response. A little later, he rises and with signs and gestures invites me to follow him outside. Our path lies through shaded jungle, but before long emerges in a large, dusty open space where we are exposed to the full glare of the afternoon sun. I continue to follow him for about half an hour, when I seek the shelter of a banyan tree, which then lends its protecting shade to my overheated body. After a short rest, we travel on for another half hour, again crossing a patch of scrub jungle, and ultimately wander down to a great pool by a route with which Ramaya appears to be familiar. Our feet sink deeply into its soft, sandy bank as we walk up to a patch of water which is overgrown with colored lotuses. The yogi selects the shade of an exceptionally low tree and seats himself beneath it. I drop to the sand and squat beside him. The tufted head of the palmyra is spread out above us like a green umbrella. We seem to be entirely alone in this quiet corner of our turning globe, for a bare, deserted landscape stretches away for a couple of miles until it meets dense, hilly jungle again. Ramaya crosses his legs and folds his feet under him in his customary meditation posture. He beckons me with his finger to approach a trifle closer. Then his flaccid face turns to the water, to the front, and his eyes gaze steadily across the water, and he quickly sinks into a condition of profound meditation. The minutes which seem so slow creep past, but Ramaya remains quite motionless, with his face as tranquil as the surface of the pool beside which we squat, and with his body fitting into nature's landscape like a tree unstirred by the slightest wind. A half hour passes, yet he still sits under the palmyra, very strange and very quiet, wrapped in introspective silence. His face now seems transfigured by a profounder peace than usual, and his rigid eyes are fixed either in vacancy or on the distant hills. I do not know which. It is not much longer before I become acutely susceptible to the silence of our lonely surroundings and to the amazing calm of my companion. Little by little, with an insidious but persistent gentleness, peace weaves itself into the texture of my soul. The mood of serene triumph over personal distresses, which I could not reach before, now comes to me more easily. In his own mysterious way, the yogi is helping me. I cannot doubt that. Barely a breath comes from his quiet form, so sunk is he in deepest contemplation. What is the secret of his sublime condition? What is the source of this beneficent radiation which emanates from him? The heat is lessening with the approach of evening, and the baked sand begins to cool. A ray of vivid gold from the westerning sun falls on the yogi's face, turning his motionless body for the nonce into a hallowed idol. I let go of him in thought that I may turn again to enjoy the increasing peace which is flowing in waves over my being. The changes and chances of mundane existence now take their fit proportions as I begin to live in my own diviner depths. I perceive with startling clarity that a man can look serenely upon his tribulations, if only he can find the standpoint of his deeper self, that it is foolish to cling to the transient comfort of worldly hopes when the unchanging certainty of a diviner protection awaits his acceptance, and that the reason why the wise Galilean told his disciples to take no thought for the morrow was because a higher power had taken thought for them. I perceive, too, that once a man accepts this invitation to place his confidence in the prophetic element within his being, he may pass through the vicissitudes of human life in this world without fear and without faltering. And I feel that somewhere close at hand, there is the fundamental value of life, in whose calm air no cares may exist. Thus, the burden which lays so heavy on my mind vanishes with this change of spiritual atmosphere. I reck little of time during this beautiful experience, and I do not know how one can satisfactorily explain the mystery of the divine withinness and its interdependence of any temporal sense. Twilight falls upon the vivid scene. Somewhere in the dim recesses of memory, I am aware that night comes in these tropic parts with surprising quickness. Yet, I feel no concern about the matter. It is enough that this wonderful man at my side is content to stay and lead me inwards to the sovereign good, serenity. When at last he lightly touches my arm as a signal to rise, the darkness is complete. Hand in hand we wander into the night through this lonely and desolate region, making the homeward journey without light and without track, guided only by Yogi Ramaya's uncanny sense of location. At any other time, this place would have filled me with unpleasant fears, for past experience of the jungle at night has left eerie memories. One felt that the world of unseen living forms was close at hand, with animals moving hither and thither. And for a moment or two, there flashes across my mind's eye a picture of Jackie the dog, which often companions my walks in the district and my meals at the hut, with the 2 scars around his throat from cheetah bites, and of his unfortunate brother who was captured by the same cheetah and never seen again. Perchance I, too, may see the glowing jade-green eyes of a prowling, hungry cheetah, or tread unwittingly in the darkness on a cobra lying coiled upon the ground, or even touch a king scorpion, that deadly little white monster, with my sandaled foot. But almost immediately afterwards, I feel ashamed of these thoughts in the yogi's fearless presence, and at once resign myself to his protective aura, which I somehow feel is enfolding me. The strange chorus of nature which begins with the Indian dawn is now being rivaled by the stranger chorus which begins when the night is somewhat advanced. A jackal sounds repeatedly in the distance, and once there comes the ominous echo of a wild beast's snarl. And when we near the pool which divides our respective dwellings, the croaks of frogs, lizards, and bats come to our ears. In the morning, I open my eyes on a sunny universe and my heart to its sunny message. My pen would wander on into some account of the scenic life around me, and into further record of many talks with the Maharishi. But it is now time to draw this chronicle to a close. I study him intently and gradually come to see in him the child of a remote past, when the discovery of spiritual truth was reckoned of no less value than is the discovery of a gold mine today. It dawns upon me with increasing force that in this quiet and obscure corner of South India, I have been led to one of the last of India's spiritual supermen. The serene figure of this living sage brings the legendary figures of his country's ancient rishis nearer to me. One senses that the most wonderful part of this man is withheld. His deepest soul, which one instinctively recognizes as being loaded with rich wisdom, eludes one. At times, he still remains curiously aloof, and at other times, the kindly benediction of his interior grace binds me to him with hoops of steel. I learn to submit to the enigma of his personality and to accept him as I find him. But if, humanly speaking, he is well insulated against outside contacts, whoever discovers the requisite eruditeness thread can walk the inner path leading to spiritual contact with him. And I like him greatly because he is so simple and modest, when an atmosphere of authentic greatness lies so palpably around him, because he makes no claims to occult powers and hierophantic knowledge to impress the mystery-loving nature of his countrymen, and because he is so totally without any traces of pretension that he strongly resists every effort to canonize him during his lifetime. It seems to me that the presence of men like the Maharishi ensures the continuity down history of a divine message from regions not easily accessible to us all. It seems to me further that one must accept the fact that such a sage comes to reveal something to us, not to argue anything with us. At any rate, his teachings make a strong appeal to me, for his personal attitude and practical method, when understood, are quite scientific in their way. He brings in no supernatural power and demands no blind religious faith. The sublime spirituality of the Maharishi's atmosphere and the rational self-questioning of his philosophy find but a faint echo in yonder temple. Even the word God is rarely on his lips. He avoids the dark and debatable waters of wizardry, in which so many promising voyages have ended in shipwreck. He simply puts forward a way of self-analysis which can be practiced irrespective of any ancient or modern theories and beliefs which one may hold, a way that will finally lead man to true self-understanding. I follow this process of self-divestment in the effort to arrive at pure, integral being. Again and again, I am aware that the Maharishi's mind is imparting something to my own, though no words may be passing between us. The shadow of impending departure hangs over my efforts, yet I spin out my stay until bad health takes a renewed hand in the game and accelerates an irrevocable decision to go. Indeed, out of the deep inner urgency which drew me here has come enough willpower to overthrow the plans of a tired, sick body and a weary brain, and to enable me to maintain residence in this hot, static air. But nature will not be defeated for long, and before long, a physical breakdown becomes threateningly imminent. Spiritually, my life is nearing its peak, but strange paradox. Physically, it is slipping downwards to a point lower than it has hitherto touched. For a few hours before the arrival of the culminating experience of my contact with the Maharishi, I start to shiver violently and to perspire with abnormal profuseness, intimations of coming fever. I return hastily from an exploration of some usually veiled sanctuaries of the great temple, and enter the hall when the evening meditation period has run out half its life. I slip quietly to the floor and straightway assume my regular meditation posture. In a few seconds, I compose myself and bring all wandering thoughts to a strong center. An intense interiorization of consciousness comes with the closing of eyes. The Maharishi's seated form floats in a vivid manner before my mind's eye. Following his frequently repeated instruction, I endeavor to pierce through the mental picture into that which is formless, his real being and inner nature, his soul. To my surprise, the effort meets with almost instantaneous success, and the picture disappears again, leaving me with nothing more than a strongly felt sense of his intimate presence. The mental questionings, which have marked most of my earlier meditations, have lately begun to cease. I have repeatedly interrogated my consciousness of physical, emotional, and mental sensations in turn, but dissatisfied in the quest of self, have eventually left them all. I have then applied the attention of consciousness to its own center, striving to become aware of its place of origin. Now comes the supreme moment. In that concentration of stillness, the mind withdraws into itself, one's familiar world begins to fade off into shadowy vagueness. One is apparently environed for a while by sheer nothingness, having arrived at a kind of mental blank wall. And one has to be as intense as possible to maintain one's fixed attention. But how hard to leave the lazy dalliance of our surface life and draw the mind inwards to a pinpoint of concentration. Tonight, I flash swiftly to this point, with barely a skirmish against the continuous sequence of thoughts which usually play the prelude to its arrival. Some new and powerful force comes into dynamic action within my inner world and bears me inwards with resistless speed. The first great battle is over, almost without a stroke, and a pleasurable, happy, easeful feeling succeeds its high tension. In the next stage, I stand apart from the intellect, conscious that it is thinking, but warned by an intuitive voice that it is merely an instrument. I watch these thoughts with a weird detachment. The power to think, which has hitherto been a matter for merely ordinary pride, now becomes a thing from which to escape. For I perceive with startling clarity that I have been its unconscious captive. There follows the sudden desire to stand outside the intellect and just be. I want to dive into a place deeper than thought. I want to know what it will feel like to deliver myself from the constant bondage of the brain, and to do so with all my attention awake and alert. It is strange enough to be able to stand aside and watch the very action of the brain as though it was someone else's, and to see how thoughts take their rise and then die. But it is stranger still to realize intuitively that one is about to penetrate into the mysteries which hide the innermost recesses of man's soul. I feel like some Columbus about to land on an uncharted continent. A perfectly controlled and subdued anticipation quietly thrills me. But how divorce oneself from the age-old tyranny of thoughts? I remember that the Maharishi has never suggested that I should attempt to force the stoppage of thinking. Trace thought to its place of origin, is his reiterated counsel. Watch for the real self to reveal itself, and then your thoughts will die down of their own accord. So, feeling that I have found the birthplace of thinking, and I let go of the powerfully positive attitude which has brought my attention to this point, and surrender myself to complete passivity, yet still keeping as intently watchful as a snake of its prey. This poised condition reigns until I discover the correctness of the sage's prophecy. The waves of thought naturally begin to diminish. The workings of logical, rational sense drop towards 0 point. The strangest sensation I have experienced till now grips me. Time seems to reel dizzily as the antennas of my rapidly growing intuition begin to reach out into the unknown. The reports of my bodily senses are no longer heard, felt, remembered. I know that at any moment I shall be standing outside things, on the very edge of the world's secret. Finally, it happens. Thought is extinguished like a snuffed candle. The intellect withdraws into its real ground, that is, consciousness working unhindered by thoughts. I perceive what I have suspected for some time, and what the Maharishi has confidently affirmed, that the mind takes its rise in a transcendental source. The brain has passed into a state of complete suspension, as it does in deep sleep. Yet there is not the slightest loss of consciousness. I remain perfectly calm and fully aware of who I am and what is occurring. Yet my sense of awareness has been drawn out of the narrow confines of the separate personality. It has turned into something sublimely all-embracing. Self still exists, but it is a changed, radiant self. For something that is far superior to the unimportant personality which was I, some deeper, diviner being rises into consciousness and becomes me. With its arrive, an amazing new sense of absolute freedom, for thought is like a loom shuttle which is always going to and fro, and to be freed from its tyrannical motion is to step out of the prison into the open air. I find myself outside the rim of world consciousness. The planet which has so far harbored me disappears. I am in the midst of an ocean of blazing light. The latter, I feel, rather than think, is the primeval stuff out of which worlds are created, the first state of matter. It stretches away into unreliable, infinite space, incredibly alive. I touch, as in a flash, the meaning of this mysterious universal drama which is being enacted in space, and then return to the primal point of my being. I, the new I, rest in the lap of holy bliss. I have drunk the platonic cup of Lethe, so that yesterday's bitter memories and tomorrow's anxious cares have disappeared completely. I have attained a divine liberty and an almost indescribable felicity. My arms embrace all creation with profound sympathy, for I understand in the deepest possible way that to know all is not merely to pardon all, but to love all. My heart is remoulded in rapture. How shall I record these experiences through which I next pass, when they are too delicate for the touch of my pen? Yet the starry truths which I learn may be translated into the language of earth, and the effort will not be a vain one. So I seek, all too roughly, to bring back some memorials of the wonderful archaic world which stretches out, untracked and unpathed, behind the human mind. Man is grandly related, and a greater being suckled him than his mother. In his wiser moments he may come to know this. Once in the far days of his own past, man took an oath of lofty allegiance and walked, turbaned in divine grandeur, with the gods. If today the busy world calls to him with imperious demand and he gives himself up to it, there are those who have not forgotten his oath, and he shall be reminded of it at the appropriate hour. There is in man, which belongs to an imperishable race. He neglects his true self almost completely, but his neglect can never affect or alter its shining greatness. He may forget it and entirely go to sleep in the senses, yet on the day when it stretches forth its hand and touches him, he shall remember who he is and recover his soul. Man does not put the true value upon himself because he has lost the divine sense. Therefore, he runs after another man's opinion when he could find complete certitude more surely in the spiritually authoritative center of his own being. The Sphinx surveys no earthly landscape. Its unflinching gaze is always directed inwards, and the secret of its inscrutable smile is self-knowledge. He who looks within himself and perceives only discontent, frailty, darkness, and fear need not curl his lip in mocking doubt. Let him look deeper and longer, until he presently becomes aware of faint tokens and breath-like indications which appear when the heart is still. Let him heed them well, for they will take life and grow into high thoughts that will cross the threshold of his mind like wandering angels, and these again shall become forerunners of a voice which will come later, the voice of a hidden, recondite, and mysterious being who inhabits his center, who is his own ancient self. The divine nature reveals itself anew in every human life. But if a man walk indifferently by, then the revelation is as seed on stony ground. No one is excluded from this divine consciousness. It is man who excludes himself. Men make formal and pretentious inquiry into the mystery and meaning of life, when all the while each bird perched upon a green bough, each child holding its fond mother's hand, has solved the riddle and carries the answer in its face. That life which brought you to birth, O man, is nobler and greater than your father's thought. Believe in its beneficent intention towards you, and obey its subtle injunctions whispered to your heart in half-felt intuitions. The man who thinks he may live as freely as his unconsidered desires prompt him and yet not carry the burden of an eventual reckoning is binding his life to a hollow dream. Whoever sins against his fellows or against himself pronounces his own sentence thereby. He may hide his sins from the sight of others, but he cannot hide them from the all-recording eyes of the gods. Justice still rules the world with inexorable weight, though its operations are often unseen and though it is not always to be found in stone-built courts of law. Whoever escapes from paying the legal penalties of earth can never escape from paying the just penalties which the gods impose. Nemesis, remorseless and implacable, holds such a man in jeopardy every hour. Those who have been held under the bitter waters of sorrow, those who have moved through shadowed years in the midst of tears, will be somewhat readier to receive the truth which life is ever silently voicing. If they can perceive nothing else, they can perceive the tragical transience which attends the smiles of fortune. Those who refuse to be deluded by their brighter hours will not suffer so greatly from their darker ones. There is no life that is not made up of the warp of pleasure and the woof of suffering. Therefore, no man can afford to walk with proud and pontifical air. He who does so takes his perambulation at a grave peril. For humility is the only befitting robe to wear in the presence of the unseen gods, who may remove in a few days what has been acquired during many years. The fate of all things moves in cycles, and only the thoughtless observer can fail to note this fact. even in the universe, it may be seen that every perihelion is succeeded by an aphelion. So, in the life and fortunes of man, the flood of prosperity may be succeeded by the ebb of privation. Health may be a fickle guest, while love may come only to wander again. But when the night of protracted agony dies, the dawn of new-found wisdom glimmers. The last lesson of these things is that the eternal refuge in man, unnoticed and unsought as it may seem, must become what it once was his solace, or disappointment and suffering will periodically conspire to drive him in upon it. No man is so lucky that the gods permit him to avoid these two great tutors of the race. A man will feel safe, protected, secure, only when he discovers that the radiant wings of sublimity enfold him. While he persists in remaining unillumined, his best inventions shall become his worst impediments, and everything that draws him closer to the material frame of things shall become another knot he must later untie. For he is inseparably allied to his ancient past. He stands always in the presence of his inner divinity and cannot shake it off. Let him then not remain unwitting of this fact, but deliver himself, his worldly cares and secret burdens, into the beautiful care of his better self, and it shall not fail him. Let him do this, if he would live with gracious peace and die with fearless dignity. He who has once seen his real self will never again hate another. There is no sin greater than hatred, no sorrow worse than the legacy of lands plushed with blood which it inevitably bestows, no result more certain than it will recoil on those who send it forth. Though none can hope to pass beyond their sight, the gods themselves stand unseen as silent witnesses to man's awful handiwork. A moaning world lies in woe all around them, yet sublime peace is close at hand for all. Weary men, tried by sorrow and torn by doubts, stumble and grope their way through the darkened streets of life, yet a great light beats down upon the paving stones before them. Hate will pass from the world only when man learns to see the faces of his fellows, not merely by the ordinary light of day, but by the transfiguring light of their divine possibilities, when he can regard them with the reverence they deserve, as faces of beings in whose hearts dwells an element akin to that power which men name God. All that is truly grand in nature and inspiring beautiful in the arts speaks to man of himself. Where the priest has failed his people, the illumined artist takes up his forgotten message and procures hints of the soul for them. Whoever can recall rare moments when beauty made him a dweller amid the eternities should, whenever the world tires him, turn memory into a spur and seek out the sanctuary within. Thither he should wander for a little peace, a flush of strength, and a glimmer of light, confident that the moment he succeeds in touching his true selfhood, he will draw infinite support and find perfect compensation. Scholars may burrow like moles among the growing piles of modern books and ancient manuscripts which line the walls of the house of learning, but they can learn no deeper secret than this, no higher truth than the supreme truth that man's very self is divine. The wistful hopes of man may wane as the years pass, but the hope of undying life, the hope of perfect love, and the hope of assured happiness shall ultimately find a certain fulfillment, for they constitute prophetic instincts of an ineluctable destiny which can in no way be avoided. The world looks to ancient prophets for its finest thoughts and cringes before dusty eras for its noblest ethics. But when a man receives the august revelation of his own starry nature, he is overwhelmed. All that is worthy in thought and feeling now comes unsought to his feet. Inside the cloistral quiet of his mind arise visions not less sacred than those of the Hebrew and Arab seers, who reminded their race of its divine source. By the same auroral light, Buddha understood and brought news of nirvana to men, and such is the all-embracing love which this understanding awakens, that Mary Magdalene wept out her soiled life at the feet of Jesus. No dust can ever settle on the grave grandeur of these ancient truths, though they have lain in time since the early days of our race. No people has ever existed but has also received intimations of this deeper life which is open to man. Whoever is ready to accept them must not only apprehend these truths with his intelligence, until they sparkle among his thoughts like stars among the asteroids, but must appropriate them with his heart, until they inspire him to diviner action. I return to this mundane sphere impelled by a force which I cannot resist. By slow, unhurried stages, I become aware of my surroundings. I discover that I am still sitting in the hall of the Maharishi and that it is apparently deserted. My eyes catch sight of the hermitage clock, and I realize that the inmates must be in the dining room at their evening meal. And then I become aware of someone on my left. It is a 75-year-old ex-station master who is squatting close beside me on the floor with his gaze turned benevolently on me. "You have been in a spiritual trance for nearly 2 hours," he informs me. His face, seamed with years and lined with old cares, breaks into smiles as though he rejoices in my own happiness. I endeavor to make some reply, but discover to my astonishment that my power of speech has gone. Not for almost 15 minutes do I recover it. Meanwhile, the old man supplements the further statement. "The Maharishi watched you closely all the time. I believe his thoughts guided you." When the sage returns to the hall, those who follow him take up their positions for the short interval which precedes the final retirement for the night. He raises himself on the divan and crosses his legs. Then, resting an elbow on the right thigh, he holds his chin within the upright hand, 2 fingers covering his cheek. Our eyes meet across the intervening space, and he continues to look intently at me. And when the attendant lowers the wicks of the hall's lamps, following the customary nightly practice, I am struck once again by the strange luster in the Maharishi's calm eyes. They glow like twin stars through the half-darkness. I remind myself that never have I met in any man's eyes as remarkable as those of this last descendant of India's rishis. In so far as the human eye can mirror divine power, it is a fact that the sages do that. The heavily scented incense smoke rises in soft spirals the while I watch those eyes that never flicker. During the 40 minutes which pass so strangely, I say nothing to him, and he says nothing to me. What use are words? We now understand each other better without them. For in this profound silence our minds approach a beautiful harmony, and in this optic telegraphy I receive a clear, unuttered message. Now that I have caught a wonderful and memorable glimpse of the Maharishi's viewpoint on life, my own inner life has begun to mingle with his. I fight the oncoming fever during the 2 days which follow and manage to keep it at bay. The old man approaches my hut in the afternoon. You stay among us, draw to an end, my brother, he says regretfully. But you will surely return to us one day. Most surely, I echo confidently. When he leaves me, I stand at the door and look up at the hill of the holy beacon, Arunachala, the sacred red mountain, as the people of the countryside prefer to call it. It has become the colourful background of all my existence. Always I have but to raise my eyes from whatever I am doing, whether eating, walking, talking or meditating, and there is its strange, flat-headed shape confronting me in the open or through a window. It is somehow inescapable in this place, but the strange spell it throws over me is more inescapable still. I begin to wonder whether this queer, solitary peak has enchanted me. There is a local tradition that it is entirely hollow and that its interior dwell several great spiritual beings who are invisible to mortal gaze, but I disdain the theory as a childish legend. And yet, this lonely hill holds me in a powerful thrall, despite the fact that I have seen others infinitely more attractive. This rugged piece of nature, with its red laterite boulders tumbled about in disorderly masses and glowing like dull fire in sunlight, possess a strong personality which emanates a palpable awe-creating influence. With the fall of dusk, I take my farewells of everyone except the Maharishi. I feel quietly content because my battle for spiritual certitude has been won, and because I have won it without sacrificing my dearly held rationalism for a blind credulity. Yet, when the Maharishi comes to the courtyard with me a little later, my contentment suddenly deserts me. This man has strangely conquered me, and it deeply affects my feelings to leave him. He has grappled me to his own soul with unseen hooks, which are harder than steel, although he has sought only to restore a man to himself, to set him free and not to enslave him. He has taken me into the benign presence of my spiritual self and helped me, dull Westerner that I am, to translate a meaningless term into a living and blissful experience. I linger over our parting, unable to express the profound emotions which move me. The indigo sky is strewn with stars, which cluster in countless thousands close over our heads. The rising moon is a thin crescent disk of silver light. On our left, the evening fireflies are making the compound grove radiant, and above them the plumed heads of tall palms stand out in black silhouette against the sky. My adventure in self-metamorphosis is over, but the turning axle of time will bring me back to this place I know. I raise my palms and close them together in the customary salutation, and then mutter a brief goodbye. The sage smiles and looks at me fixedly, but says not a word. One last look towards the Maharishi, one last glimpse by dim lantern light of a tall, copper-skinned figure with lustrous eyes. Another farewell gesture on my part, a slight wave of his right hand in response, and we part. I climb into the waiting bullock cart. The driver swishes his whip. The obedient creature turns out of the courtyard into the rough path and then trot briskly away into the jasmine-scented tropic night. The end. A Search in Secret India by Paul Brunton.